What's going on? Back again. Welcome aboard to another episode of the Q&As. And I'm really excited because we have a very special guest who goes by the name of Angus Bradley. Some of you guys probably know him from his Instagram page. He's a strength and conditioning coach from Australia. And he makes a lot of posts about biomechanics, all that good stuff. And we're going to dive into some deep rabbit holes today. Some great, interesting topics. So welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me, Phil. I'm stoked to be here. I haven't done a YouTube Q&A before, so this is a first for me, so I'm pretty stoked about that.
100%, man. So it's like, Angus and I, a lot of the stuff that Angus talks about on his Instagram page, I've spoken a lot about on my YouTube channel. Things like talking about how SSB squats, trap bar deadlifts are super underrated. Talking about squattier squats, stacking. He has this thing called respiratory arms, if I'm not mistaken. The importance of
restorative arms, but it's basically respiratory arms.
The importance of variability in your training, which I also speak about as well. The importance of alternating exercises, just tons of stuff down that realm. So today's episode, we're going to be a bit all over the place, but it's all going to be time stamped in the Q&A. And yeah, man. So anything I'm missing here?
No, I think that's a good base to get us started. I've got a bit of a backstory, but I've told that on a few podcasts, and it's just awesome. We'll get into that another time where we can do a bit more of a chill chat when we're not just stacked with questions.
Nice, man. So let's get into it, man. Like I noticed you talk very down about certain exercises. Or let me rephrase that. You're very open-minded. You look at everything like a tool in a toolbox. You see the light in certain lifts, but I've noticed a pattern where you tend to speak very highly about the goblet lifts. You made one post about it saying that, if you're absolute first day beginner, general pop, 80 years old, or you're the most advanced, you could still benefit from some type of goblet lift, whether it be for a end of the workout, prep, even throughout the workout, even for certain people as a main lift. So what is it exactly about this goblet squat? Because I know that you talk a lot also about, controlling your center of mass, front-loaded variations. But like, is there anything else besides that makes it so? Because you said it checks off boxes that don't even exist. So.
And that's it. And just going back to what you were sort of hinting at before, there's definitely some exercise. Like, I don't believe that there's any truly bad exercises because, like you said on the correction, like everything at the end of the day is a tool in the toolbox. But we have like a fitness meta that exists, right? And there's these exercises that have been known as the king of exercises, or people refer to them as the big three, or, all these barbell lifts that were thought to be the most functional and best for hypertrophy. And no matter what your goal was, like there were just these exercises that were the tools to go to. So I think those are some of the exercises I'm frequently publicly seen sort of downplaying the importance of, but it's more just me trying to settle everything into that position where I'm like, all right, these are overrated and these are underrated. All of these have just as many uses in the right application as each other. Maybe the exception to that, due to my particular personal biases, is the goblet squat. I think that there is something in the goblet squat for absolutely everyone. And because it is such a simple exercise to train someone through that triple flexion or squatty squat pattern. So it's a great way to target a lot of tissues for someone who doesn't have much movement competency, but still get them through a large range of motion. But then there's also so many things that, like, people often get stiff backs, and people often, it's one of probably the most searched things on YouTube. One of the most searched things in functional fitness would be like, how do I improve my squat pattern, or how do I get deeper into a squat? So many people can't even hit depth properly. And this goblet squat, it just fills in that slot for everyone. And, I think that's a really obvious example for maybe like someone's first day in the gym. We get them goblet squatting. It's pretty obvious how you can see those benefits there. But even for someone who is an advanced squatter, I think there's lessons that you can learn in the goblet squatters. I don't necessarily love the term corrective exercise, but to like smooth out some technical issues just in a less complicated setting with the goblet squat before you go into a more complicated setting, let's say a competition squat for a power lifter at max weight, before trying to, perform those sort of movements in that context.
Right. And I definitely feel like when I added in like a warm up, especially, and even as a cool down, man, or even as like a split squat, like, and that brings me on to the point is that, yeah, man, yeah, I have too many questions, man. I'm not even gonna jump in that hole, but let's get into the next one, which
We
is,
could do a complete hour on split squats
yeah,
just
yeah,
by
yeah.
themselves.
Forget about that, man. So you said in one of your posts, many people are stuck in an inhaled position. And then you talk about how a full exhale could do wonders for their hip extension. You mind elaborating a bit on this?
Yes. So, and this is like relatively speaking as well, speaking about the front of the rib
Of
cage,
course.
people are like really inhaled there. And what I mean by that is like when you think about like good or textbook inhalation mechanics, we want to see 360-degree circumferential expansion of the rib cage. But what happens for a lot of people is they're really expanded at that lower anterior portion of the rib cage, those bottom false ribs. And so they're always in an inhaled orientation there, which just means that their center of mass has a tendency to be out over their toes. And it's pretty common these days for people to discuss that reciprocal relationship between the pelvis and rib cage. They have to sort of oppose each other in their actions so we can balance and stay upright. So when your rib cage is out over your toes, so you can balance, people's hips kind of come back into that sort of what looks like a anterior pelvic tilt presentation, I guess people commonly refer to it as, or some people call it lower cross syndrome. I know people really
Right.
hate that term, and I completely understand why. So for people, when they can exhale a bit, especially out of that lower front portion of the rib cage, and pull those ribs back in, often then people have a lot easier time getting into full hip extension.
Interesting. So you made another post regarding the foot pronation. You say you need foot pronation if you want a hip hinge. The question is, how do you improve? What's your definition or your formula for improving foot pronation?
So I think it depends on what person you're dealing with, and whether or not they have been coached, and then how they've been coached, because anyone who's been around the fitness space for a while has probably been told to screw their feet into the ground, or anyone who's ever been a runner, or anyone who's been to the physio, so many people have been told that they overpronate. So just by telling people that it's okay to pronate, that's just enough to get a lot of people going. But then some people, it's like whether they're consciously scared of it, like they think it's going to hurt them, or maybe they know it's not going to hurt them anymore, but they were so afraid of the movement for so long before they learned that pronation was fine, that their body just doesn't want to do it because it's so out of practice, and you've almost like trained yourself into a different strategy. And this is where, like, I think when you're scared of certain movements, or you think there are certain movements that are going to injure you, that's when it causes all sorts of weird techniques and things like that. Whereas if people just focus on what's efficient, that's sort of when you end up like with a really nice, efficient technique, and you can't really predict injuries anyway. So that's ideally how we're meant to move. But like I said, so many people have feared pronation for so long and just done their absolute best to train themselves out of this really efficient strategy. So for people who, once they know it's okay to pronate and their feet still aren't pronating, then there's certain split squat drills you can do. There are certain goblet squat drills you can do, or sometimes it's just about bringing more awareness to that part of the foot. So if you're trying to get your feet to pronate in a hip hinge in particular, you can even just put a sock under the inside of the arch of the foot, and sometimes that can just help people get a better idea of where the ground is and like which part of the foot to push through. So that can be a great way of doing it as well. Just
So you're
quickly, I
saying,
know we're looking for short answers here. The other thing that can really stop people from pronating is just having their whole center of mass too far forward the whole time throughout the hip hinge, and just staying in their toes, because again, that's going to cause a lot of external rotation and supination of the foot. To get pronation, we need to be on the middle of the foot and the inside edge.
on a side note for this question, I remember you made a post, man. I don't remember what you said word for word. I'm just paraphrasing. You said how a lot of people, they're so far forward that their heel is actually their midfoot. Did you say that?
No, almost. It's so if you cue people on the heels, they're so far forward, they'll come back to their midfoot. Because a lot of people are just shoved so far forward and have been there for so long. They just have no awareness of how much room or space there is behind them to come back to actually get their weight into their heels. I think this conception that slow or stiff people are stuck in their heels is, I don't think that's a very good observation. Like when I look at people, most people are stuck in their toes.
Right. But okay, so for the RDLs, for example, you would say that you have both your feet on the ground, and in between the feet, you basically just have a sock, and it's basically filling up the gap of where the foot should pronate.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can imagine if you have had an arch in that foot for God knows how long, and no matter what movement you're doing the best to maintain that arch, your body just doesn't even know what it feels like to push through the middle of the foot. So if you can't get the middle of your foot on the ground, bring the ground to the middle of your foot, so at least then you can start sensing that pressure, even if you're not pronating, because maybe your body just can't do that yet, can't put it together in that situation. So just getting it feeling the ground, that's a great starting point. And often once people can feel the ground there, they will have a much easier time pronating.
Okay, so that's for the hinges. And then as far as the squats, you're saying, you said there's different kinds of...
You can do the same trick, but it doesn't matter how much you try to give someone a sense of ground onto their midfoot if you aren't getting them to pull their center of mass back to at least the midfoot.
Got you.
So it's often this combination of things.
Interesting. Yeah, I hope you guys are taking all this in, man. This is very interesting stuff. We're about to jump into some more stuff. So that's pronation for the lower body. Let's talk about supination for the upper body. Because what you tend to see is that a lot of people, I just made a video on this today, shot a couple today. It was on the forums, and I was talking about how you hear tons of people complain about how wrist curls bother the wrist. These are the same people who complain about how barbell curls are just uncomfortable. But the reason why is because a lot of people, they don't have full access to that supination. And that's why those are the same people where you give them an easy bar and it's somewhat close to neutrality, to a neutral hand position, and it automatically feels better. So yeah. What's your advice for people like that who clearly don't have access to that supination? How would you improve that? Because I've seen, for example, people preach arm bars, stuff like that, where you get like a nice reach. What's your whole outlook on that?
Yeah, I think arm bars could definitely help, and any reaching activity to sort of loosen those shoulder blades up can definitely help you with rotation at the shoulder and then all the way down that chain, all the way into the wrist where you're trying to supinate or maybe lacking some supination. I think the thing that is most appropriate though for restoring that supination is doing some work, some reaching work down in that lower range of shoulder flexion between 0 to 60 degrees. And makes a lot of sense because obviously that's pretty specific to the orientation that you have to get into to do that barbell curl. But I think exploring more movements there, like Zercher squats or even goblet squats, you could get a low reach going, or certain cable split squat setups. There's a million different ways you could get a low reach in that session beforehand. But if you train in that orientation during that workout a little bit more, before you get to your barbell curls, you might find that by the time you get to them, you've warmed up those positions a little bit more effectively through your previous exercises, even though you weren't even really thinking or training biceps yet. You might have been training your legs or, training whatever with that low reach. But then you come to do your bicep curls and you're just warmed up and ready to get into that supinated position.
So for a low
reach, long-term exposure to those low reaching movements can also improve that ability to supinate and then barbell curl comfortably.
Okay. But for you said the low reach goblet, so does that mean you just grab it a bit lower? Like, what does that mean?
So just imagine a protractor if you're standing side onto the camera. And so having your elbows in front of your rib cage and some space between your shoulder blades to open up that back of the rib cage. So, I'm on video, aren't I, for this? So anywhere from here up to about here.
Got you.
If you think about when people talk about reaching activities or freeing the scap is a very popular concept and very helpful concept these days. People always go straight to here for their reaching activities or up here for landmine press. But all down here, there are some amazing reaching options. And it's, like I said, this is all your Zercher squats, all your low cable split squats and things like that. Even a safety bar or a goblet squat, you can get into this low reach position. So do some activities like this before you want to go to, because think about what do people commonly program before they go and finish off a workout with barbell bicep curls. It is very common for people to do a lot of like pronated bench press, barbell back squats, really pronated, and you're spending so much time in that orientation and you're training that and warming up that position, and then you want to take yourself in the complete opposite direction at the end of your workout. That's not going to give everyone problems, but it's not surprising to me that a lot of people have trouble dealing with all of those movement things being thrown into the same workout. So I think people could think about the way they structure exercises to better set themselves up for the movements where they have a little bit of trouble. But then again, like we've just discussed completely restructuring a workout to fit in barbell bicep curls. So for certain people, it might just be like, do you really like that exercise? And the answer might be yes. So it's like, let's do that work. Or the answer might be like, no, I just got told they were good. I actually hate them. In which case it's like, do some other things. But then again, most bicep exercises involve, being able to supinate really well. So I think you might want to address it at some point.
Yeah, well said. Speaking of that pronated grip though, you're talking about, like, been getting some good feedback on the push-up post I made. This is everybody watching right now. This is the man right here who sparked that, you know?
Yeah, and that's it. If you imagine the shape we make,
hand palm on the floor.
It's the same thing, right? You've just got that arch in your hand permanently if you're always working out with barbells or you're always holding onto those cable attachments. To get that hand fully spread out, it does the exact same thing for you as when you get that foot fully spread out. It's just amazing. The body loves exploring those areas.
1000%, man. Especially if you do a lot of like dumbbell, barbell, dips, pull-ups. It's all like you're always gripping on that, like that 1-inch bar, you know?
How good does it feel, especially like as a bodybuilder, you're always doing so much volume, like any exercise you do, it's going to get monotonous. That's why it feels so good every time you change up your program. The human body it loves, and it might not be the best thing for progress,
100%.
but it's one of the best things for feeling good is just mixing up your workouts.
But 100%, man. But like to add on to that, you even made a post saying that if you're not a power lifter, every lift is a main lift.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, who's like I never told anyone, yeah, I was a bodybuilder, because I'm not I'm just a recreational, just average Joe.
I stereotyped you as a bodybuilder because you're more muscly than I am.
every
if you're bigger
lift,
than me, you're a bodybuilder.
Exactly. But it's like, man, like I started incorporating way more weighted pushes in my program, man. And like, I'm so used to gripping on stuff, like 1-inch bars, dumbbells, all that kind of stuff, and it gets so repetitive after a while. And it's almost like you get like a nice deload on those push-ups. And you even made a post saying like, look, like start exploring more. And that's actually why, as opposed to just doing more farmers walks, more grip this, grip that, I started doing hexagon holds, because I could get a similar effect as the push-up, and I could actually work the thumb. You made a post about the plate pinches and like how a lot of grip exercises, like, yeah, like you grip the bar and like the thumb just like hanging there, like it doesn't, half the time it doesn't even do that much, and it's like,
and that's what separates us from the animals, bro. Opposable thumbs, like a strong thumb, like, and that helps with that. I hate the term real world or functional, but there's a bit of truth to it. Like if you try to grab something that's not a handle, like a lapel, you want to choke some guy out, that a strong thumb just does work.
But it gets underdeveloped, especially in a world of like thumbless grips and stuff like that. Like, what's your thoughts on, like, besides like plate pinches and like hexagon holds, like what else do you recommend for people who can't really feel their thumb too much?
Well, even that push-up setup, right? You're going to be putting pressure through your thumb at some point, especially as you try to pronate your hand, because that's just your big toe on the upper limb. So I think that in of itself is going to have a great training effect on the thumb. especially in combination with the pinch carries on some other day, because then you're training the thumb in two very different positions. So I think for a lot of people that's enough. But then other things you can do, go climbing, I would say, or just train with all sorts of different shaped implements. Or if you're a real grip training or hand training enthusiast, you can get a bucket full of rice, uncooked rice, and just shove your hand. I'm talking like a paint bucket that's 12 liters deep or something, and then just shove your hand into it and wiggle all your fingers around. And that can be a really effective way to train your hand.
Interesting. So you must give a thumbs up to like fat grips, globe grips, stuff like that then.
Yeah, because especially ever since I got into weightlifting, I did a good 5 years of Olympic lifting training. And just during that period, I got so strong, but my grip deteriorated so much because you just hook everything and you don't actually need that strong a grip if you have big hands to hook grip the barbell. So I really needed to go out of my way to make sure I maintained my grip strength just to be like a healthy, strong, regular human being. It was so embarrassing. Like, yeah, I could snatch 110, clean a jerk 140, but then my mum would ask me to open a jar for her, and I'd like really struggle. I'd be like, this is just silly.
It's crazy, man. Yeah, but it's specificity too, you know. But
yeah, exactly.
You made a separate post. It said, so the thoughts on spreading the toes versus spreading the floor.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I think people are trying to create stability. That's the idea between spread the floor. But I think the downside to trying to spread the floor is a lot of people end up sort of screwing their feet outwards and again just trying to supinate their foot or arch their foot too hard. And I think trying to spread your toes or spread your foot into the ground, it gives us that nice big base of support. And it also means our foot can change shape throughout the squat as it needs to, depending on what stage of the squat we're at. So it can travel through both supination and pronation when it needs to.
Okay, so what's your thoughts on like those toe separators then?
I think there's a time and a place for them. I don't think it's bad to exercise in them, but I think they might be a bit invasive and like take away from the intensity of the exercising. But I think when you're relaxing, watching some Netflix, like throw your shoes off, put your toe spacers in, wiggle your toes around. I think it's more important just to move your feet and walk around a lot.
Right.
But I think the toe spacers can also be helpful, especially if you've really bunched up and you think it's causing you some problems.
Okay. You made another post about the hamstrings. Look, we're not speaking about one particular person here. We're just, anyways, hamstrings being stuck in eccentric orientation. And then you said a lot of people need more strengthening in the shortened position. So that's just a fancy way of saying, look, a lot of people aren't doing enough hamstring curls, and to reinforce that.
And I think if you look at like the human body as a system, it's like dependent on every single part sort of working in harmony. It's almost the same as what I was saying when people just need to exhale a bit better out of that lower anterior portion of their rib cage. Because if you think about it, that's going to do the exact same thing to the orientation of the hamstrings if you're in the standing position, right? So if you think about someone with really stretched out hamstrings, when they're just standing there, they're probably in an anterior tilt. They've probably got their rib cage out over their toes. So it's almost just the same problem, but just addressing it from the other end. And that's where like these issues can seem really complex for people. And it's like they're simple and complex at the same time because it's really just one problem that you have, but it's kind of like you'll do the same thing everywhere. Or it's like that strategy, it's not just your lower rib cage. It's how you've arranged yourself from head to toe.
Right. That's probably where the whole, you see a lot of these people in like the biomechanics world saying like, don't stretch your hamstrings. In many cases, for many people, you shouldn't stretch them. Like, what more is there to stretch,
Yeah. Let's challenge that a little bit though, because like I tend to agree. Like, do people need more hamstring stretching? Most people, I'd say that's not what they need. Yet we still have so many people that are addicted to stretching their hamstrings, and of course it could be just placebo, because they've been told by someone that it's really good for them to stretch their hamstrings, because that's just a really common thing to say. Any muscle that's feeling discomfort, a lot of people just tell you to stretch it. But even for someone who's stuck in a relative eccentric orientation at the hamstrings, if they go further into an eccentric orientation somehow and then come back to where they were, well, they're still getting some eccentric and concentric action of the hamstrings. So is it the perfect thing that they need? Absolutely not. Far from it. But motion is lotion. Like, things just don't want to be stuck in one position. And even if you're taking it from one awkward position to another awkward position, I think there's a positive effect that a lot of people feel from that in terms of just like feeling good. But if you get someone to actually get, into a more neutral orientation of the hamstrings, I think that's a much better and much more efficient length tension relationship for a lot of activities as that starting point.
Right. I guess it's kind of similar like foam rollers. Some coaches are like, look, like, you may not be getting much out of it, but look, if you really like doing it, okay, do it for like a couple minutes before the session. Just come early and you could do it. But I'm not gonna spend like an hour session looking at you foam roll for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, the perfect example of that would be someone who's been told that they need a foam roll 3 times a day just throughout their work day. It's like they'd feel amazing from that, but it's not the foam rolling. It's that they got out of the chair and did anything different. They probably could have got more benefit out of going through a walk around the block. But just because you got them out of the chair, there's an effect of that. And that's why we always just keep circling back to, what does the human body love? Variability. We've got all these joints and movement options for a reason. Like, learn to explore them and integrate them into an intelligent training plan.
1000%, man. On that same topic, man, like I was I had like a 2 weeks where I tested positive, whatever, and like I was just home for like 2 weeks, man. I'm just staring at my dumbbells, and I'm just like, I'm on Angus's page, and the way he's talking about the goblet squats, he seems to be talking like giving that notorious status to like to the side bends as well. So I'm like, I've never really explored side bends like that, and like I just grabbed like a 35, just like a couple sets of 15, and man, for like a week I was sore, man.
It's
I've never
crazy.
explored that before. I've done heavy one-arm farmers. I've done like one-arm shrugs, whatever. But like I've never actually bent in that position, and it's like I've never explored that, And like there's certain coaches, who I'm talking about, who are like against side bends, but it's a very old school.
It blows my mind. I don't understand, and because I've heard all those things as well from like some people who seem like they're so intelligent. But then it's like, why are there so many joints there? No one has been able to explain it. They're like, it's not meant to move in training or underload. I'm like, but why are there joints there?
Yeah, Angus and I have been saying certain things about ab training. Like, I would never tell someone, look, to build your pecs, all you got to do is just grab a pec deck machine and hold a shortened position, and you're good. The same way I'm not going to tell you to maximize abdominal development, just do planks. It's like, there's still some movements. You can still do some dynamic work. Just like how my forearm video, I didn't say just do farmer's walks. Like, you can still do like a hammer curl. You can still do stuff like that. Like ulnar radial deviation, whatever the case is. But like, yeah, I'm not a big fan when people say like just do static lifts for abs and obliques. Like there's so much to explore there, and like the proof is in my side bend.
Especially for people who are doing so much heavy lifting, where it's like if you're training the core pretty isometrically there. Like, I think as much as I joke about people who say like, oh, every compound lift is a core exercise, it's like there is some truth to that. So I think supplementing in dynamic ribcage exercises is amazing. But then for someone who doesn't do a lot of heavy lifting, and for maybe someone who's doing like functional patterns or something like that, yeah, sure, do some isometric core work. That would probably be like amazingly useful for those people, because everything they do is like loosey goosey and flowy,
Right. You made another good post the other day, man. Tons of good posts. I'm not even reading the list at this point. I'm just like reminiscing, but about like you see a lot like in like the bodybuilding community, like people are getting really like people are getting very fixated on like, look, if you don't do the lift exactly in this motion, like if you raise your arms slightly too high, like it's almost like the lats won't even be working at all, you know? And like you made a
Yeah.
point about that I like a lot. And like, for example, like you see a lot about, RDLs, like for like a good decade on YouTube, RDLs were the go-to for hamstrings. And now people are like, look, RDLs is it's stiff legs. You gotta do stiff legs. You want to get your hamstrings. And I understand what they're trying to say because they're like, look, if you want to bias it, you want to put more of the odds in your favor. But what's your whole take on like the stiff leg RDL thing? Like, do you really think it matters that much?
Nah. Oh man, and that's the thing. Like, I'm so out of the bodybuilding lens that like the way I talk about training is pretty different. I've never programmed a stiff leg deadlift. Like, I program RDLs for hamstrings and glutes.
Right.
And I often do a lot of hamstring accessories, just like machine work or single leg curls and things like that on top of it. But like an RDL, it for sure works your hamstrings and your glutes. And a stiff leg, I'd be really curious to know like how much that does unload your glutes. And I'm sure it does bias the hamstrings a little bit more. And like you said, I think where these discussions and knowing these origins, insertions down to the core is useful is for a problem muscle group. There's no point isolating every single muscle or biasing every single muscle perfectly in your program, because then it just takes too long to train the entire body. I think Mike Israel just talks about it's like getting a tan. You just need liberal exposure. But everyone, the same way as when they're getting a tan at the beach, there's certain parts of your body that are easy to expose, right? Oh, forearms, they get a lot of sun. The back of your neck, that's very easy to get a lot of sun when you're out there working in the sun all day. But then there's certain little spots on your body that you're going to have to take extra care to expose to the sun based on whether you move or how you like to dress. And it's the same in the gym. So I know a bunch of people who have trouble activating their lats. So I think for a bunch of people, knowing the specifics of origin and insertion and action for lats, I think that is super useful. And then at a population level, and then on a case by case basis, I think it's like your problem muscle groups, like know that origin, insertion, and action like the back of your hand. For everything else, I think just the general awareness of it is enough.
Right. Depends where they're trying to go,
The other big one, the one that I originally ran into back in the day when I was working in a commercial gym, I used to just do my lateral raises like Lu Xiaojun because he was my favorite weightlifter. But all the bodybuilders would be like, no, man, it's just your traps taking over as soon as you go over this way. I was like, mate, I want huge traps. That sounds amazing. Like, yeah, I'm here for the delts and the traps. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah, there was definitely a period of YouTube where people were like, oh, minimize the traps. Even I've probably even said something similar in the past, man, where like, Christian Thibodeau, take the bands, put it on the traps. Like, God forbid the traps start to work as well, But,
yeah, you can say a lot of things that are true that still don't matter.
But either way, both variations will still like generate results anyways. These are all little like just nitpicking at this point,
But and that's the thing. I don't want to discourage anyone from getting into the minutia, because that's the other thing. Some people just write it off and they're like, no, you don't need to know the specifics. I'm like, no, that is super useful for someone out there. So I never want to discourage anyone from getting into the finer points of anatomy or biomechanics or anything like that.
Yeah, same here. Like a lot of certain people just want to put all the odds in their favor, and they really like. Even I like that kind of stuff. So it's just like, but I just want to know what your take was on, like the stiff legs and RDL whole thing. But
am I allowed to name names on your show? Just to clarify something.
What's up?
I'm a little bit annoyed at Kassem and his N1 brand, and I make jokes about them because he tried to call me out and he tried to talk shit on my page and he blocked me. But if I was a bodybuilder, I'd absolutely be taking his courses because that stuff is great.
It is, man. Yeah,
a few people have me pegged as an N1 hater. I just wanted to clarify my stance there.
I like his stuff, man. I like. Yeah. There's tons of bodybuilders, man. I follow. Man.
Very useful. Sometimes he just thinks he's the only person who's ever had a good idea.
Here's what it is, man. Let's jump into well, since we're on the topic of the hinge with the RDL, people who tend to round their back on a hinge. What's your thoughts on that? And like
Depends what.
I know. Sorry, to add a bit more
No,
to
not
that,
at
but
all. You
I know
go.
you're saying like when you see butt wink in the squat, for example, a lot of people get butt wink because they're so extended that as they descend in the squat, the only direction they could really go into is into flexion because there's no more extension to really go into. Would you say it's kind of similar in the RDL where it's like they're so extended that, or
Yeah, yeah, and especially what can help people maintain a bit more lumbar lordosis is if they let their thoracic spine round a bit. It just gives them a bit more space to maintain a lordotic curve if they're trying to do that in a hinge movement. So I think
okay,
that's something, because that's what you do, right? If you just extend your thoracic spine and you're trying to extend the hell out of your lumbar spine at the same time, and you're trying to hip hinge, it's just a bit too much to ask. So I think just giving yourself a bit more space at the top and just shifting your sternum back, opening up the back of the rib cage a little bit at the top there, or at that sort of mid part of the back, that can definitely give people a bit more space to hinge more cleanly.
so would you cue like a reach then on that
Yeah, absolutely. And you can
low
reach a
reach?
little bit further if you need to shift a little bit further back, or if you've gone too far back and you're behind the midfoot, then you can retract a bit to pull yourself forward. So that is something that you can play with how much you're reaching.
And what's your thoughts on people? Because I've seen different videos of people like talking about like the whole, low back rounding on your barbell rows and your RDLs, and then they'll talk about, for example, you get on all fours, do like cat camels. You really think that works? Where you just go at
Oh, as in,
extension, flexion, like, and you do that as like a prep work with like your feet on
I
a
think
wall.
that's good. But are we also talking about like whether doing like those heaving rows is bad for the back or something? Like, do you want to get into that or?
No, like let's say you take someone who's doing an RDL, their back
Yeah.
rounds, or they're doing, let's say, a one arm
Right.
bent over row or just a barbell bent over row, and you just see like the low back's kind of rounding,
Yeah. How
which
do
is
we
pretty
clean
common.
that up? Yeah. I would say the main one is just teaching about their center of mass.
Okay.
And so again, I feel like I always go to anterior load for the squats, but it actually works pretty well with the hinges as well. Because again, when people are lacking movement options, they're almost always forward over their toes. So because a hip hinge and a squat, they're not that dissimilar, especially through the mid part of it. And it's shifting the weight back a little bit that helps people navigate the hinge and the middle part of the squat. So you can do like a plate loaded good morning, just holding a plate or a kettlebell on your chest and then just telling them to try to hit the wall behind them with their butt and just drive it back horizontally. The other thing that could help is manipulate you can elevate the toes or the heel. Either of those could be useful. I don't like elevating the toes because I think that just fixes people in supination a lot of the time. So I think heel elevation can be underrated for cleaning up a hinge and giving someone a little bit more space back there.
Said heel elevation.
Yeah.
So you have okay. So now the whole goblet thing goes into RDLs as well. Like so that it's basically a goblet RDL.
Yeah, because we can all see that, right? Like as you shift back, like that's sort of how you get into triple flexion, and that's sort of how you get a bit more upright, so your back muscles aren't as tense to hold you up. Whereas as you go further and further and further forward, the entire backside of your body sort of tightens up because it's just fighting gravity a little bit more. So whenever you want to loosen someone up, it doesn't really matter what the task is. It's sort of just with humans in general, where you want to pull them back to give them more movement options
Interesting.
as a general rule.
Interesting. You made another post talking about one of the reasons why we have messed up feet is because we don't expose them to enough of a variable environment. That's probably why like you talk a lot about 10K steps a day. Like you made another post like, oh, just get your steps in for the day, live 4 days a week. But
Yeah.
I think that's the reason why, like when people just sit down all day and like they don't get the 10K steps, like just feel like crap, But what are some
this
ways
is
to add more
where like
variability?
I'm a bit of a squat you sympathizer as well, because like I hate the way that he tells people that their shoes are ruining their feet. It's like, well, yes, but no, because it's the same thing as the chair thing and the foam rolling thing, right? It's like, go wear your dumb cool joggers with the shitty toe box that's going to mess up your feet, but also go for a walk outside with your shoes off and watch some Netflix with your toe spreaders on, or do some exercises barefoot every now and then. It's like, it's not the shoes and it's not the toe box. It's just that you always do the same thing. And eventually, if you always do the same thing, it's going to start to feel bad. Exposing your feet to different environments, that's so amazing, just to get the whole foot moving without you even having to consciously think about it. Because I think that's what frustrates people with all this nitty-gritty biomechanics. People just don't want to have that much to think about in their workouts to satisfy all this variability stuff. It's like you don't have to think about it if you just use different objects to exercise. Change your environment that you exercise in a little bit more. And obviously that's going to take you away from your specific goals, but it's just doing enough of this stuff to stay healthy.
I think people get really caught up in the whole like specificity, you know, but like the reality is if you're not an Olympic weightlifter, if you're not a power lifter, like you don't need to have like you don't have any competition like coming up. You don't have any competition lifts. So it's like every lift is a competition lift. You're doing a push-up, if you're doing a rack chin, it's a competition lift, you know. So it's like
and most people at a population level are so unathletic that just by training generally, you'll look like more of a bodybuilder than the average Joe. You'll jump higher than the average Joe. You'll run faster than the average Joe. Just by training generally, like you'll still feel like a bodybuilder depending on what room you're in.
100%, man. It all comes down to the variability, man. And some people who are chasing the specificity, some of them would even benefit from more variability anyways, you know?
Yeah, just giving yourself an off season. There is only so much specificity the body can handle. And then the more general your training is, it's like if you like training and you want to do a lot of training, the more general you keep it, the more you can think how many sessions a week a triathlete can get through and how much training. Could a bodybuilder do that much training? No, because their only options for their goal is like, well, I just have to go in and stretch and squeeze. And there's only so much of that my body can cope with in a week. Whereas a triathlete can probably do like at least half of that bodybuilder's program, and he's going to do God knows how many swimming sessions that week, and he's going to do God knows how many cycling sessions that week, and then he's going to get out and run, and then he's probably got a job too, because triathletes aren't that highly paid. So there are some general principles and lessons we can sort of derive from this. And this isn't saying that, you know, specific training is bad. We all love it.
100%.
Yeah, it's been over celebrated, I would say.
Yeah, my classic example of that would be because I've trained at certain gyms where it's like pure bodybuilders, you know, and like I met at least two guys in my life who like messed up their knee off like playing volleyball, you know. They're bodybuilders, you know. Like they have no frontal plane. There's everything is just stationary sagittal lifts, and it's like it's just like the knee is just hanging off a string, man. You know, like
yeah,
they've never done it. Like if it doesn't care, but the thing is, a lot of these bodybuilders, for example, is sometimes they're similar to the strength athletes in the sense that if it doesn't carry over to them adding more tissue to that muscle, getting like bigger and like more muscular, it's like a waste of time, you know.
And I think so many people, if you want to get into this chat, they're not really honest about what their goals truly are, because like people say like, no, I only care about bodybuilding, but it's like, I've seen you on the weekend. I know you love to like run around with your mates and play with the football. And it's like, all of a sudden then it's like, you say you don't like need to do movement in the frontal plane, but then you pick up the ball and you get excited and you go to cut at a high velocity. And it's literally the first time you've moved in the frontal plane in weeks, you know. It's like, and then then you feel a bit roughed up the next day, and then you miss a week of your specific bodybuilding training that you love. And it's like, if you're honest about yourself and you're like, no, I do actually like running around and I do actually like being in the outdoors and things like that. And if you just do a little bit of that stuff to better prepare your body, well, then it's like you're actually going to get more out of your training anyway. Because like I said, most people, I think if they're honest with themselves, their goals are a bit more general. It just sounds cool to be like, you know, to have an identity around one specific modality of exercise. Like I said, not that there's anything wrong with having an obsession, because I've been that way with certain things myself.
I guess because some people, they like to be a part of something, you know. So it's like they like to somehow like throw themselves into boxes, like, oh, I'm a CrossFitter, I'm a strongman, I'm a Olympic weightlifter.
Yeah, and it's because people want you to do that as well. Like when I became a weightlifter, I noticed as well, like not only did I develop the identity, but also the people around me, like I was trying to impress them with, no, I'm a serious weightlifter. Like I stopped training chest for 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. It's like some people, for example, they don't even It's not even other people putting themselves in the box. It's themselves who put themselves in the box.
Oh, dude, it's the worst. It's the worst when you realize you did it to yourself.
Yeah, when
you're like, it was the people around me, and then it was like, no, I kept showing up, like trying to impress it.
The funny thing, this Kale Beck who made a post about this is like, man, like so many people like they try to differentiate themselves like, oh, I'm using an axle bar, I'm a strong man. Then other people, they're using hook grip, I'm an Olympic weightlifter, but like the average person looks at all these people, from all these groups, like people who go to the gym. It's like as different as you're trying to make yourself look, like not to say it matters what people think, but it's just like, at the end of the day, you're lifting weights, man. Like not that.
It's good and bad, like in the sense that like 90% of the people who work in the fitness industry are weirdos. But if you're a weirdo and you need some friends, my advice would be get into the fitness industry or like just start lifting some weights, and some other weirdos will track you down.
Yeah, you attract who you are, man. You made a post. You made a post about said decline press and curtsy lunges are low key the most underrated functional exercises. You mind elaborating on that?
Yes, that was just me sort of looking at the fitness meta at the time. I was like, what is everyone doing, and what does everyone think is just the best movements? Because again, on this variability train, if you want to make people feel good and improve their general preparedness, you want to look for that stuff that you're not doing. And that was just at the time where I felt like everyone was just going crab walk mad. Every exercise was about banding your knees and just shoving your knees out as hard as possible. And so I don't like those big exaggerated curtsy lunges. I don't find them as useful where there's a lot of lateral movement, but just a little bit of a hip shift as you step back behind your other leg. I think that can be amazing for putting a stretch through the glute med and some other deep external rotators. And that can be something that a lot of people are missing and a lot of people undertrain. And same with decline bench. You can probably see what I'm getting at with my obsession about low reaches.
100. Yeah. I already see where that's going, man. I'm not even gonna ask about the low cable rows, man. But
yeah, super handy, because I never used even a low cable split squat setup before, because I just never found any use for it, because I was like, wait, it's like, don't you want like vertical force? But it's just the same as giving someone a real strong anterior load. Just gives them something to shift their weight back against and get a reach going if they want. And so easy to manipulate the angle.
100%, yeah. Like I've given clients that in the past, like a cable Zercher is like a squat prep. The squat gets way more upright. They don't do that. It doesn't get the same references,
I used to write down on people's programs split squat, just split squat, and I had an idea in my head of what a split squat was, but there are so many bells and whistles you can throw on a split squat to facilitate someone or to just give them what they need. It's amazing. It's such an underrated tool. It can just be so many different things.
Interesting. So let's talk about the side bend, right? We got like a good 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
Let's get into the side bend. So to someone who's never done it before, what are some? Because every lift has been butchered, What's your thoughts on the side bend, man? Like, I'm sure you see people butcher that lift too. Like, what are some cues? What are you looking for in a nice side bend?
So I like to do them because I think there's the standing one where you hold a weight on one side and then you bend to that side and then you bend away from it. And I think those are great. I think I like to do the side lying ones where you're almost in that side plank position and then touch your hips to the ground and lift them away from the ground as hard as possible. And I think the main thing there for a lot of people is they can experience shoulder discomfort, especially when they're trying to explore those really deep ranges of lateral flexion. And it's important to just sometimes look at the angle of the AC joint. It sort of is forward like 10 to 15 degrees. So you almost want to be in like the scapular plane with your humerus, and that can be a lot more comfortable to set up on. And I think the other thing is just like slowly working into the segmentation and things like that, because it can make you really, really sore to the point where it can just ruin the rest of the week's worth of training if you dive into them a little bit too quickly. And just progressing both the range and the load over time. Whenever people look at a movement like this, and it does sort of scream accessory exercise, but we don't have to leave it in that box. And like accessories, they're still there to be progressed. So just make sure you try to get better at them over time. Like I said, whether it's more range, whether it's more load, whether it's more capacity, all of those things are very, very useful, especially for those muscles around the thorax that perform so many different roles for us depending on what we're trying to do.
So you're a bigger advocate of like the Copenhagen style side bend as opposed to like where you just hold the dumbbell and.
Yeah, I don't necessarily integrate the adductor. Like I have both my feet up on top of the bench, but yeah, in that closer to a Copenhagen, like side lying position, I find that really, really useful. And then I think the big thing as well is people don't try to compress hard enough. People use it as a big stretch, but once you've opened that thing up, especially on that left side for a lot of people, try to close that off as hard as possible, and it's going to give you so much internal rotation and pronation on that left side, as well as some extraordinarily useful lateral compression.
What's your thoughts on like on that same ladder, on that same like side lying? When you hear about like putting sandbags on the obliques, like for like squished individuals.
I love that.
Yeah, I've tried.
Super underrated.
I actually felt like I got taller. Like I grabbed like 150, just put it on my my oblique, man, after like a nice workout, man. It actually feels amazing. But I want to know your take on that.
Some people got memed like crazy for doing that because it doesn't really make sense unless you've sort of looked into this ribcage thing. But it's just like the ribcage is pretty malleable, so it's really easy for it to change shape if you do a lot of heavy lifting. And then it's not that hard then to just smush it back in the other way, because you're just like, all right, what forces have I been putting on my body? A lot of anterior to posterior compression. So just giving yourself some lateral compression makes a shit ton of sense if you've started feeling bad. And because remember how you were discussing how a lot of your mates who only do like super heavy lifting or train like meathead bodybuilders, the frontal plane, like movement in the frontal plane is the first thing to sort of go for these people. Well, like rather than doing a whole bunch of complex frontal plane drills that they probably suck at, either get them to do some side bends because they're really easy and they're hard to mess up. Or better yet, maybe they don't even want to do side bends. So you're like, I don't know, just lay here with a sandbag on you and listen to this YouTube Q&A. And it's going to give them some of that effect. So I just think,
right.
Like in terms of usefulness and just easy interventions, and people are like, oh, it's only temporary. The range it gives you back. It's like, so what? It's just laying on your side with a sandbag. And some people get like literally 15 to 20 degrees of extra hip IR out of that. I think that's an amazing deal.
It feels pretty good too, man.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna ask this question, and I feel like I already have a feeling I'm gonna get a certain answer and response. But I'm gonna ask it anyways. It's the whole table testing versus just testing through movements. I kind of see you as the kind of guy who just tests through movements, but I might be wrong. Like, do you actually do table testing?
I think table testing is an art form, and I've never been formally trained at it. I kind of taught myself, and it's something I'm getting better at. But because I don't work in a commercial gym anymore, and I'm not at uni, so it's really hard for me. Because how do you get good at table testing? It's like do it 1,000 times on 1,000 different people, and I've probably done it a couple of hundred times on a couple of hundred different people. Maybe even less than that. So, and it's something that I think can be useful, but for the majority of people, especially people who aren't like healthcare practitioners or physical therapists or things like that, it's pretty unnecessary. Where it can be useful is if your active assessment is giving you some really confusing sort of stuff and nothing makes sense. I look at the table test as sort of going in to do closer detective work. It's like, all right, let's just completely unload this person and see their movement potential. But for most people, like I said, it's just the active assessments that are useful, especially for us trainers.
Got you.
I sort of look at it as I look at table testing as the same as the fat pinching. It's like, does it tell you something? Yeah, but it's just like, can you tell if someone got leaner or not without pinching him? It's like, yeah, absolutely, just by looking at him.
Got you, yeah. Still nice skill. Still nice to know, for sure.
Yeah, because I've heard about how good, like, I've heard stories of Poliquin doing the fat pinching, and apparently he was just like wildly accurate and efficient at it. Could just like crank through a room of people in minutes and just like have it all down to the percent. So yeah, it's all down to like how good you are with that craft. For most people, table testing is a waste of time just because they suck at table testing and clinical reasoning.
Yeah, not to mention that some people are good at cheating the system as well.
Yeah,
And if the coach doesn't have the eye for that, then
that's what I mean. There's so many potential failure points in that table testing. But like I said, for some people, it could be useful information.
so you talk a lot about like, center of mass, of rib cage over the pelvis, just getting just stacking, And you made a separate post saying that oftentimes people forget the head, and that the head is in this equation as well. And then oftentimes, in like the mainstream YouTube community, you'll see people like talk about like chin tucks and stuff like that. Like, what's your thoughts on someone who has a head that just protrudes forward?
Yeah, and I'll sound like I'm repeating myself, like, because it is just common for people who either sit in a chair a lot, or don't move around a lot, or who lift a lot of heavy weights, just to be shoved forward. And the body, it does what it can, and it gets good in that position, even though it's not ideal for certain tasks. But that's just where it's found itself. So it makes the best of it. Then when people realize how many movement options they have behind them to explore, and they start to understand this relationship between the pelvis and rib cage, they'll try to adjust that. And so they shove their center of mass back so their rib cage is sitting over their pelvis. But your central nervous system is so amazing, and it's really running the show. It's like, it's not really your prefrontal cortex. It's all like your reflexes, and it's things that aren't even a lot of movement. Like the reflexive movement doesn't even reach your brain. It's in like your spinal cord. I'm pretty sure your stumble reflex, it gets to like somewhere around like your thoracic spine, and then you're already throwing the leg out in front of you. So basically what I'm trying to get to is like, you'll shove your rib cage back, and then your body's like, no, I balance over the toes, buddy. And it'll just shove your head further forward. And then you'll get your head back, and then your rib cage will want to go back out. So it's like, and that's why so often for people to make these changes and to gain true awareness of what these positions feel like, we often have to lay people down on the ground just so that everything will just relax. And you go, all right, it doesn't matter how weak I am or how efficient I am at arranging myself in a certain posture. I'm actually going to give my body a friendly environment here where I can show it a new position that's going to suck out, but there's not going to be many forces acting on it. And then once you get them standing, instant forces acting on them. But now they might know what they're chasing because they felt it on the ground with a lot of references, with their whole back on the ground and the back of their head feeling the ground. So they knew exactly where they were in space.
Interesting. So basically their head, basically those people who have that forward head orientation, they just need head references, like the back of the head.
Yeah, absolutely. They just don't know how far forward it is.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's just their entire spine straightening out, right? We talked about what it looks like. You end up in that, I called it an inhaled posture, when your spine goes completely straight. If you think about a neck straightening out as well, it's going to sort of lose its lordosis and the head will fall forward.
Interesting. But that brings me into my next question. Like, since we're talking about, being on the ground, you made a post saying if you suck at rolling, you most likely suck at rotating. So, so then I noticed you were into like arm bars and stuff like that. So it's like, who would benefit from rotating, or who wouldn't, or
a
just
powerlifter. Okay, so let's say if you're a powerlifter and you're good at powerlifting and you're going for some records, or you've got a comp coming up in a week or two, you don't want to be good at rotating. Because what does everyone complain about most commonly with their bilateral lifts breaking down? Like, you'd be coming out of the squat and you start rotating to one side, and like you might miss the lift, or because you're just not producing as much force as possible, because you want to be able to use both sides. Like, you're never going to be perfectly even, but you want to be closer to even if you're trying to lift a symmetrical object. So for people who are trying to perform like that, less rotation is typically a good thing.
Right.
And then like a weightlifter would be somewhere in between. And then like a locomotion or field sports athlete would be on the other end of that spectrum, where they benefit from having as much rotation as possible and then as much strength as they can have before they lose that rotation.
Got you. That pretty much ties into that post you made about didn't remember word for word, but you're like, a lot of these powerlifters, they walk like penguins, but that's one of the reasons why they're so strong, because they have that stiffness to say something like that, no?
If you see someone with a perfect gait cycle, you're not looking at an elite powerlifter. It's just the way it is. Like they're trying to be something that doesn't rotate. Their sport asks them to become that. So it's not necessarily a negative adaptation of lifting for a powerlifter to become very stiff from lifting weights. It's actually what they want. And they lift in a way where they're often always trying to reduce their range of motion, unless they're doing their hypertrophy work. Like some of their assistance work, they'll open themselves up to these positions where they explore a bit more range of motion. But again, this tends to be much more of an off-season strategy.
100%, man. That's exactly what they want. Same thing with like a lot of strongman competitors, you know?
Yes, yeah.
Just ask one more question, man, then we'll wrap up, man. You often see like the Macebell. I'm sure you've heard of the Macebell. And like you see like guys like you know like Chris Duffin, like very well-respected lifters. I've seen coaches like Zach Evanesh, like they basically warm up with the Macebell. They use it as like an upper body warm-up. Who would benefit from that? Like, or who wouldn't? You know what I mean? Or what's your take on the Macebell?
I think for the right person, stuff like that. For everyone, right, just training some mace work, that's an awesome skill because it's just a whole bunch of movements rolled into one. There's unlimited possibilities, so many different velocities, angles, weights, loads, and things like that you could explore. I think for a lot of people, it probably just ends up being a bit too much activation. It probably ends up fatiguing some stuff that they might find they really need later in their heavy work. So it all depends sort of where you fit it in. I reckon I would encourage people who like that sort of stuff for shoulder health, who are powerlifters, just to do it like outside of their workouts a little bit more. I think there's probably some more chilled out, more graded exposure and slightly more specific preparatory things that they should consider doing before an actual strength workout. But like on the weekends or for some restorative work outside the session or after the session, that's where I think it has much more benefit if you're going to place it in.
Got you, man.
But I can definitely see how like that implement is great because it's going to move very differently because of the way it's loaded. So it's definitely going to make so many people's shoulders feel good. But then shoulders feeling good and benching heavy aren't always the same thing.
I hear you, man.
Like Julius Maddox, I don't want to comment. Actually, I won't say anyone specific. Ask any world record holding bench presser, just be like, how do your shoulders feel? And I bet you they're not like amazing.
Right. So someone like that would benefit from it.
No, because they just don't care about shoulder health. They just want world records. I was just saying, like for some people, it's just like they just put health on the shelf for a bit and they're like, I'm here to bench big, screw my shoulders. But then for a lot of people, it's like, you know, a little bit, we just pull it back a little bit before that.
Yeah, because that's the extreme level, you know?
Yeah, it's all your personal relationship with it.
Same. But that pretty much wraps it up, man. I'm really glad like got this Q&A in. You know,
oh man, it was an awesome chat and the questions were really, really good. I hope my answers give your audience some useful tools and things to explore.
100%, man. To everybody who's still watching the Q&A, man, you guys are the real MVPs. Everything's gonna be time stamped. Where can we find you? As far as like
you can find me at Angus Bradley 92 on Instagram. My YouTube channel, I think, is just Angus Bradley. It could be Angus Bradley 92, and there's going to be much more content coming to that, hopefully this year. And then I also have a podcast, which is currently inactive, but you can check out the High Performance Podcast, HYP Performance Podcast on all podcast platforms.
Love it, man. Appreciate it.